This is London.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to LDN Underground. I'm your host, JKS, and this week I'm joined by Paul Malen and Yorghos, two absolute legends of LDN wrestling. They've both been mainstays of the company for many, many years, and they've both got some really interesting stories to tell. This week's episode is both going to be video interviews with them both, and we've also got Sanjay joining us for a little bit as well. In both those interviews. So we're just going to cut right to it. It's kicking off with Paul. I can't wait to talk to him. So let's just cut straight to it and start off this episode of LDN Underground. So, ladies and gentlemen, my first guest for this episode, he is a former LDN British Heavyweight Champion and multiple-time Capital Champion. He's been with the company for around 7 or 8 years now. I'm really pleased to introduce Paul Malen. Paul, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hi, very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So how are you doing at the moment, obviously, with COVID-19 and everything? How are you dealing?
Yeah, I'm coping okay. I think I'm coping as well as anybody is at the minute. They're very testing and trying times, aren't they? So it's just kind of living day to day and trying to make the most out of a very trying situation.
Yeah, I think everyone I've spoken to sort of from the wrestling scene, they've basically just said try and make the most out of it, staying in the best shape, or some people sort of taking a bit more time for recovery and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's the perfect excuse for a rest, especially for somebody like me that for 10 plus years didn't take a break at all. So it's great.
Definitely. So for those unaware of your background, could you please just tell us a little bit about how you started in wrestling, what inspired you to start, and your first kind of experiences training?
Okay, so I'm trying to remember the first wrestling show I ever watched. So I'll go from the first time I saw it on TV. The first time I saw it on TV for old school wrestling fans was the match between the Big Boss Man and the Mountie, where the Mountie lost and the Big Boss Man took him to jail. And I remember the scene where watching them take the Mountie to prison, him getting fingerprinted and put in the police cell. That is the first kind of thing with wrestling I saw. And I saw Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, and I was hooked. In British wrestling wise, I went to see a show at my local leisure centre, and there was a fake Undertaker on the show. And I thought to myself, hang on, that's not the real one there. And I kind of started following British wrestling from there. How I got into wrestling as a student, I remember I was in school and I always wanted to be a wrestler. I just had no idea how to get into it. And I'd watched Tough Enough on TV, and I kind of got a mattress in my back garden and started to learn the falls and the break falls. And I remember a careers officer came around. I don't know if they actually have careers officers anymore, but a careers officer came around. They were like, well, what would you like to do with your life, Paul? And I'm kind of sat there and just shrugging my shoulders like, I don't know. And well, how about a vet? I was like, not really. How about joining the army? And I was like, no. And well, there must be something you like. And I was like, well, I like wrestling. And they laughed at me and they said, here's an electrician's course. So that was that. And then on my last day of school, one of my friends ran up to me, and this is when Power Slam magazine had first come out. And I remember he'd torn some kind of ad out, and he ran up to me and he says, here, look at this. And it was an advert for the NWA UK Hammerlock School in Kent. So I got a job and I saved my money for a basic introductory course there. And that started me off with wrestling. I traveled from Nottingham to Kent every Saturday. And from there, I started touring schools. So I went from the NWA UK Hammerlock School in Kent to then going to Portsmouth for the FWA Academy every Sunday. Then I started going to Future Shock Wrestling in Manchester. And then I found out there was a school 10 minutes from my house in Nottingham. And it had been there all along, just really poorly advertised. So that's how I finished up. And I finished up at the Norton British Wrestling School under the tutelage of the heavyweight House of Pain Sticks. And he's the guy that got me my big break into wrestling from there.
Amazing. So you really sort of went all over the place. I mean, going all the way up to Manchester, because I train currently at the Future Shock School. So quite a
Oh,
journey,
okay.
and it shows how much you want it to travel that far, just to experience the different schools and that kind of thing.
A lot of people don't really understand how much traveling it takes until you're actually wrestling on shows.
Yeah.
But I kind of understood that before I even started wrestling. So the longer journeys really didn't seem as much to me.
Yeah, makes sense. So fast forward to your first match with LDN Wrestling. I've been told that you turned up dressed fully clad in a suit, ready to go, and that you were ribbed a little bit by Sanjay, the promoter, for doing so. But tell us about your first match and sort of your first experience with LDN.
So the rib came about because of a friend of mine named Chris Botherway got me in touch with Sanjay. And we started bouncing back and forth over Facebook and talking. And then he says, oh, we have a dress policy. We have a dress code. So you have to turn up in a suit. And truth be told, I didn't even have a suit. So I had to go and buy a suit. So that's something I don't think he actually knows, that I had to buy a suit. And it was the middle of June. So I was driving to Hayes. And I think it was a 2.5-hour journey in this suit, sweltering heat as well. And I turned up and I remember walking into the hall, and all of the wrestlers were stood there in shorts and gym vests, all staring at me like, who's this guy? And I remember just looking, thinking, oh no, I've been had. And he walked down and he just says, why are you wearing a suit? I was like, because you told me to. And he goes, oh yeah, also you're the Hillingdon Highwayman. And that was another joke. I was like, what the hell? I remember messaging my friend like, why am I the Hillingdon Highwayman? And that joke went up until 10 minutes before the match, because he kept saying to me, I've got this outfit for you. I've got this outfit for you. And I was like, what's going on? But yeah, it turned out to be a big joke. He actually called me the Hillingdon Highwayman when he announced me, but it didn't mess the match up too much. But the first match was with Richard Parliament, and it's the first time I'd ever seen a gimmick like that, and it was so good, and he played it so well. It was so much fun. And it was a jam-packed audience as well. And I remember it was one of the first times in a long time that I'd wrestled on a stage, so there was only one side of the audience.
Yeah.
But I remember it was a good match, and by the time I'd got home, Sanjay had messaged me with probably 10 more dates, so he must have been happy with the match.
Yeah. That's something Sanjay loves, his silly introductions and messing with people backstage, because he
yes,
the first day he met me, he went, are you related to Bruno Mars? Because I have underneath the cap I have like really big hair. He was like, and I'm like,
yeah.
no. And he's like, I'm pretty certain you're Bruno Mars's British cousin, aren't you? And he's like, I've heard about this. I'm like, no. And literally, as I'm walking out, it was my first show was Grays in Essex, and I'm walking out, and he goes, introducing Bruno Mars's British cousin, and I was just,
yeah.
But,
I've heard worse than that. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh God.
But fantastic. So yeah, I was about to ask you about the Hillingdon Highwayman, but we covered that. Absolute madness that Sanjay does these things. But you stayed with LDN. He was happy with you. He sent you at least 10 more dates, which is amazing. You went pretty much, consistently for quite a few years with LDN from that point. Tell us a couple of maybe stories that stick out from being on the road.
So I'm trying to think of something that's not too incriminating for the promoter of LDN Wrestling. So I remember we did a tour up north, and there was 6 of us, and he said he'd booked a hotel for us, and we had to sneak all of us into one room, and then the second night he called one of the wrestlers up and says, hey, we're in your area, can we stay over your house? And the guy was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. I remember we got there, and the guy had no idea that there was 6 of us staying, and his parents were upstairs, and we got snuck in, and I have no idea how they did not know we were in their living room. There were 6 wrestlers sprawled out all over this living room floor, and I remember Sanjay was asleep on the sofa, and they had a pet hamster, and this hamster started running around in the wheel, and Sanjay jumped up, and he's like, what was that? What was that? It's like, it's a hamster, shut up. If you've ever traveled with Sanjay, you know it's always an interesting journey. But yeah, That's one of them anyway. That's the one that comes to mind
fantastic.
for me anyway.
Yeah, I think sometimes the road stories with Sanjay are actually better left unsaid, especially on a podcast.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you.
So over that time with LDN Wrestling, you've wrestled a great deal of people from, JD Knight, Alan Lee Travis, Yorghos, all those kind of mainstays of LDN. Any sort of matches, do they stick out in your memory? Sort of favourite matches? Obviously with LDN, you work a great deal, but if there's one or two that really stuck out, let us know about them.
Cool. So before I started with LDN, I was wrestling kind of semi full time for All Star, and I kind of got chucked into working full time before I really should have been, because for All Star it was kind of me just being slotted in as, say, I'd be doing the main events as Dean Allmark's tag team partner. I'd be the guy that would take the heat, and then Dino would get the tag, and they'd do the big long stretch to finish there. So I was kind of just like a card filler. And it wasn't until I started wrestling full time for Sanjay that I kind of found my niche, and I kind of understood and knew what I was doing, really. But wrestling full time for Sanjay, one of the great things was I would be wrestling so many different people with so many different contrasting styles that it wasn't easy. It was really difficult to actually kind of understand how to work and make the match enjoyable for the fans to watch. So say with JD Knight, he was kind of an all-rounder, which the most memorable match with him was the last one that we had, which was the steel cage match in Margate. And that was my first ever steel cage match. And that was really good. With Yorghos, he was more of a catch wrestling style. And I struggled with that at first, but after a few matches, we started having really good matches. And with Alan his level of fitness was amazing. And I remember I was always blown up because no matter where I'd be, I'd turn around, he'd be right behind me, right on me. And we'd have to constantly be going at that pace, no slowing down. And one of my favorite matches with Alan was at, I think it was Cheshire. And we had a match which went about 30 minutes. But the thing is with Alan, I've probably wrestled Alan about 70 times. And some of the matches which I didn't like, I'd come back and Sanjay would be like, I love that match. But then some of the matches I thought, that was a really great match. Sanjay would come back and be like, I didn't like that match. And we'd be like, well, why? And it was like, well, I didn't like it because of, I didn't like the style to it. But yeah, those were some of the matches that came to mind for me. But with working with LDN, what it taught me was to really kind of adapt to the different opponents and the different styles that I was working with. And I'll always be grateful for that.
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask you sort of as a follow-up, whether you had a particular style that you enjoyed working or a particular sort of opponent style that you like to work with. But I think it's quite clear that you're kind of open to working with everyone and sort of adopting their style into what you're doing and building the match around that.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. So that was something actually that you said just before about finding your spot within the card. That kind of wanted to bring back to something that someone else said in the podcast. I think it was Darius Carter. We had him on a couple of weeks ago, and he spoke about he tended to be the first match on the card, and he talked about how sometimes the first match is just as important as the last match. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that in terms of why it's important to get over with the crowd, especially for those who might not have seen wrestling before. It might be their first live show. Why that first match is important.
Oh, definitely. I mean, some people joke about this, but it's kind of what the match before the interval is called the semi-main event sometimes, and people are like, it's the match before the interval. It's not. Every match on the card is important, but the opening match, you've got to think of it like this: that the first person to walk through the curtain is the ring announcer. And if the ring announcer, like Sanjay, always dressed in a suit, always looks smart with the bow tie and stuff, or whoever ring announces, it's not just somebody in jeans and a t-shirt. It's a professional show right from the very start. And the opening match, some people like the opening match because it means, we don't have to do much, which is the mentality I had for a little while at the very start. It's like, well, they're not going to want us to do too much. But then the opening match, to me, I've sat, say if I'm on the second half in a card, I always try to sit and watch the first half of the show and see how excited people are when the show is starting. And just because you're on first doesn't mean you can't go all out, and it doesn't mean you can't get your stuff in, so to speak. You have to really play it up, and you have to really entertain the people, because if they don't enjoy the first match, what's to stop them from going asking for a refund or just walking out and leaving? Because I have seen that as well.
Yeah.
I've seen people walk out because the parents sit there with their children, and for the most part, the kids are the ones that want to come and watch the show. And if they're sitting there and watching the show, and I've actually seen this, the parents turn around to their kids and saying, "Well, this isn't very good. Let's go." And they've got up and they've left. So the opening match is, in my opinion, is very, very important. Actually, more important than the main event if you think of it sometimes, because again, if they don't like what they're watching, they're going to walk off and they're going to leave.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something I've experienced, because I tend to be the first guy on the card quite a lot of times. And also, being new, like sort of I debuted January 2019. So for me, it's about a lot of places I'm turning up for the first time. It's the first time that promoter's seeing me. And it's balancing these two things for me. First, I want to make the crowd excited. I want to bring good energy, and I want to get them excited for the rest of the show. So I kind of want to build them up. I don't want to give them everything, but I want to get that crowd excited so that as soon as the next match started, they're just as hyped. But at the same time, I'm also balancing getting my stuff in to show that promoter also, oh yeah, he can get the crowd really excited, but he can also work at the same time. So then they kind of know I could put him anywhere in the card next time, and I could trust him to do a good match. And I think that's, for me, those two things that you just have to balance when you're a performer going out for that first match, and showing and making that impact on the crowd, and also a positive impact on the promoter.
Definitely. It's like a job interview if you think about it like that. And sometimes promoters will test new people by putting them in that box. It's like, hey, let's see how you react to this. And one of the worst positions to be put in for some people is the match just after the interval, because they've had a 20-minute interval, or sometimes, depending if people are doing photos in the ring and stuff, they'll have like a 45-minute interval.
Yeah.
So they'll be drained out and they'll be tired. And that is, I've seen people do really well with the match after the interval, or it's just gone down because the audience are drained and tired. So that's not a very nice position to be in my experience anyway.
Yeah. So moving on to holding championships, you've held the Capital Championship on many occasions and the British Heavyweight Championship on one occasion. Tell us about how it feels to hold a championship and know that you're someone who represents the company, because obviously it is quite a big deal to have a championship, one that means something, one that has heritage, and then to be that representative of the company. So tell us about that.
Oh, it was great because before I started working for LDN, on the wrestling channel, LDN had the TV show, which I followed quite religiously. And the titles meant so much there. Like it was one of the promotions which actually put the two championships that they had over more than the rest of the show. And they looked amazing. The championship titles themselves, really great. And I remember the first time I won the Capital title, which was from Richard Parliament. It just meant a lot. And it's always good when a promoter puts their faith in you by putting a championship on you. And I believe I held the Capital Championship twice or three times, and then the British Heavyweight Championship twice. And I spoke to Sanjay about this because I couldn't remember. I think I'm actually the first ever double champion, because I know me and Alan Lee Travis has held it. Yeah. But I'm sure it was me that held the first one, because I defeated Carl Kramer. I defeated Carl Kramer for both titles. And he was a good opponent as well, because so with the championships themselves, that's a whole nother story to a match. And that's something I really learned along the way, because say the first few matches on the card are shorter matches, the championship match has to be a longer match because the pace of the match changes. So it's kind of both wrestlers are in that match for a reason. One is the champion, but one is the challenger. And the challenger has to be worthy for that. So it's not kind of like you're beating your opponent up, you're testing each other out. And me and Alan had some really good championship matches because we put a lot of thought and effort into really testing that there. But as far as opponents go, I think I've defended the championship against Johnny Kidd, which again, that was a style in itself, which I really learned a lot from. If anything, that was my favorite style of working. when I was with LDN, and that was the British rounds matches for the championships.
Yeah. I think anyone I've interviewed the last couple of weeks who's had an opportunity to jump in the ring with Johnny Kidd, whether it was just for a little bit of a mess around before the show started or the opportunity to wrestle him, the feedback's just been phenomenal for the opportunity to have.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So moving on to the last couple of years, you've concentrated more on training and teaching the next generation of wrestlers. How do you feel about being known sort of as both a wrestler, but also now known as a trainer?
I mean, well, until all of this started, I was still a little bit active on the wrestling scene, just not traveling away too far. Because when my children were born, I just decided not to be away as much. And that's when I kind of felt that the job to teach, actually, I didn't go for it. It came to me. And it's working with an organisation called Aspire, which is based in Derbyshire. And we're funded by Children in Need and by a lot of other organisations to teach wrestling to people in need. So it's to adults and vulnerable people suffering with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and many other things, and also working with very young children from sometimes rough backgrounds and kids that suffer with anger issues and stuff. And it wasn't until I started working there that I always enjoyed wrestling. I always loved it, but I love the response to wrestling that I get more now from teaching. So I'm enjoying a whole other side of it, which is, I don't know, maybe I am remembered more for teaching at the minute, but there's never say never. I'll probably wrestle again one day, but I'm really enjoying the teaching at the moment. That's the thing. Yeah. It's something that I taught classes before, but until I kind of threw myself into this full time, I really started seeing the positive impact wrestling can actually have on people. People will often say, well, wrestling, you learn how to fall. And it's like, yeah, but it still hurts. You might learn how to fall, but it still hurts. And there's a great level of fitness and dedication that actually goes into it, and a lot more than people actually think. And it's the kids classes that I teach. The kids go from the age of 6 until 14, and then they move up to the adults class. And I've got kids that at 7 years old can bump better than me, and that is stand out on its own.
Yeah, it's that's quite an incredible situation to have with the wrestling school, that opportunity to bring people in from perhaps disadvantaged or troubled backgrounds and give them an outlet and somewhere where they feel safe and somewhere where they can develop a craft and build up that confidence. I think that's incredible. And
definitely, that's exactly what it is, because the shows that I run as well, they're academy shows. So these kids that come in from troubled backgrounds, they learn how to be a performer, and then they go out and they wrestle on shows. And it's great because they develop this character, and they go out and for 10 or 15 minutes, they forget about all of the stuff going on at home or at school.
Yeah.
And it's, to my knowledge, the company I work with as well, we're the only one funded by Children in Need, and actually recognised for the things that we do involving wrestling, which is kind of not the best subject to talk around 99.9% of people in real life, really, if we're being honest.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's fantastic, because I definitely, like, something that I've noted is when I go out and do a match, you can't think about anything else, because it is so important that you and your opponent, you know, at the end of the day, you've got to look out for each other. You've got to make sure you're doing the right thing. You can't put a foot wrong, because you could do something disastrous. So, and that's so important. So you cannot think about anything other than what you're doing. And I think that's fantastic for those people who probably spend a lot of their time thinking about, you know, things that are not very nice and are really troubling, to have that opportunity to go and to perform and just be someone else and to not think about it for that time. So I think that's amazing. So moving on, what is the future for you? Are you planning, we've sort of brushed over it slightly there. You were saying you're considering coming back, sort of moving, branching out a little bit more. Are you definitely thinking of sort of making that little comeback, or what's sort of on the next few years once COVID-19 sort of backs off and we're able to start shows again?
To be honest, just before COVID-19, decided to take a break from wrestling. So kind of COVID-19 has put that on the back burner for me. But the way I see this is when wrestling shows start back again, they're probably going to need everybody they can. So if I'm needed, then I'll be there. But it's before COVID-19, my body was kind of a bit battered and broken from wrestling for 12 years. But having that time to actually rest and work out properly and eat properly as well, and just try to get better in a way, it's helped me a lot. So never say never on wrestling again. I doubt I'll do it full time again, because obviously with the school that I work with now, it wouldn't be sustainable for me. But some of the matches I've had with LDN, I'd love to come back there again. From the guys that I got to work with, which a lot of people haven't, say Matt Striker, who I worked with twice, and I learned so much from Matt Striker. Superstar Mel Sanders, who I had the honour to work with. The Barbarian, Carl Kramer, Anthony Travis, Yorghos, Hakan, Crusher Curtis, who used to beat the living hell out of me. And even guys like Johnny Kidd as well, just so fantastic to work with, and so many different styles with LDN. And LDN took the opportunity and gave me the chance to work full time. And I did, again, for like 8 years. And I learned so much from them. I'll always be grateful to Sanjay for that as well.
Amazing. Well, speaking of the devil, we're about to bring Sanjay on, and we're going to let him tell a couple of stories and possibly embarrass you a little bit. So Sanjay, welcome onto the show. I'm just going to leave it to you guys to have a little chat, a little bit of reminisce, and tell some stories.
Well, as you said in the interview, Paul's worked for me for a very long time, on and off. And over the years, I think I've driven Paul to insanity. He's probably drunk a lot of vodka because of the amount of stress I've given him. So
I never had a single grey hair until I started working for you.
Mine's all grey hair. Yeah.
At least
you got it. Some of the wrestlers have lost their hair because of the banter and stuff.
They have, yes. I know.
Some of the things I made you do. Now, he spoke about some of the monikers you had. Those are your monikers, your names that you came up with. Now, there's a show that happened at the Milford Theatre. He's laughing because this one makes me laugh. Milford Theatre in Enfield. Steve Litton, my ring announcer's in there. You're acting, you're screaming at the audience, all irate, because you've got all these tattoos on you, as you can see, pirate tattoos all over you. So then he says, oh, he's a bit pirate. Next minute, no, you've got a crowd chanting, Pirate Paul Malen. And you're obviously getting angry, and the audience are chanting out pirate. So then I called him Pirate Paul Malen at the next Enfield show, made him dress up as a pirate because he lost his match. And I think at that stage, Paul wanted to kill me, didn't you? You hated that. I know you did.
I did hate it, yeah, with a passion, but I've still got that outfit in my loft.
So he says, I've never seen it again. He's sort of hidden it away. I think
It's still safe.
He goes to Tesco's shopping at night time whilst dressed up as a pirate to get a discount, I think. So
only wearing the patch and the headband. They're quite cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Alan does that too, which is a bit scary. But there's been many stories over the years where you wanted to kill me. There's one story where we were having a bit of a laugh, and you're going to hate me for telling this story now. Matt Striker's at this show, and you go to whack me where it hurts. And, you know, we just had banter, it's not a problem. But my reaction was to whack your hand away, and I punched you. Now, I didn't mean to punch you, just initial reaction. And you're like, you've punched me in the face. And
yeah, but if you remember, that stage was on a slant. Yes. So when you hit me, I kind of almost fell off the stage as well. I stumbled almost off the stage when you gave me that quick, swift right hand. It was very
so it looked like I created more damage than ever, but there's been multiple stories like that over the years. But as Dave Walker, I think, mentioned earlier, and I think you're incredible talent, up and down the country. I know you've taken breaks. You're on a small little break now from wrestling. I think we're all on a break from wrestling.
We are.
Yeah, so on a bit of a forced break, but hopefully we'll see you back, because I've got 101 things I like to do to annoy you. And you've got loads of black hair left at the top of your head, and I like to turn it white. So,
oh no, don't take that. Don't take that.
Yeah, no, I'm holding on to my my black hair, because mine, unlike you, the sides have gone completely. So we'll end up, we'll have to drag Justin to, because I don't really see Justin's hair. He's got a big mop of hair on his head as he takes it all out, sort of thing. So do you remember to have lots of hair? And
yes, I remember those days too.
All gone anyway. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to hand you back to Justin, but it's been fun reminding people that up and down the country, whilst hopefully you guys have had fun in the ring, outside of the ring, we've had lots of fun. And at times, I think we both wanted to kill each other. But that's the best part of it, I think. It'd be boring.
Yeah, it is.
Came and did the job. And remember, you are the Hillingdon Highwayman, so get your suit on.
Right. Yeah.
Back to you, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Just to wrap that up, that was really entertaining just to listen to that little bit there. And I've really enjoyed talking to you, Paul. So thanks very much for joining us and just enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully we'll come across you at some point in the future.
Thank you very much, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Paul for joining us there. That was really interesting talking to him about his career and about working with LDN. Now, next up for this week's episode, I'm going to be joined by Yorghos. So let's bring him into the chat and get straight into the interview. So, ladies and gentlemen, my next guest for today's episode, as you can see right now, he is an LDN wrestling mainstay and an absolute legend. I'm really excited to introduce Yorghos. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's great to be on the show. It's my first ever podcast and, interesting experience.
Yeah. How are you dealing at the moment, obviously, with COVID-19 and everything? How are you sort of like adjusting to a new kind of lifestyle?
It's interesting. I moved in. I bought my first house about 9 months ago, so a lot of it was kind of settling in still, and there was stuff to do in the house, and so it was a good opportunity to get on with that. I was still going to work. A lot of people know anyway, I'm a police officer working in central London, so I was carrying on going to work. So a lot of stuff is kind of business as usual. The main thing is missing, not seeing friends and family. That's slowly changing now. We can start meeting people up. So yeah, just carrying on, staying in touch with things like this as well. It's a new thing for me and for a lot of people, and all these ways of FaceTiming and apps. It's great. We're lucky we've got these things to keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely. I think it certainly helps. I think imagine if it was, sort of 2006 and everyone was there with their Nokia brick right now. Able to contact each other.
Yeah, everyone would be running out of credit.
So let's kick things off for the fans who might not be as well educated as to your past with wrestling. Let's talk about your training and also sort of what inspired you to get into wrestling a little bit.
Go on.
No, go on. After you.
Well, I got into wrestling. I guess my older sister Sally, she was a fan of it, and she would make me sit there on the Saturday afternoons and watch it with her. That was back in the day of, I guess it was a Saturday night main event reruns with the likes of Big Boss Man, Hulk Hogan, and then I just carried on watching it from there. And growing up, we would watch WCW Nitro and Thunder and Raw. I didn't have Sky Sports growing up, but I had cable, so I had TNT. And my friend didn't have, it was NTL back then, I think it was, before it was Virgin Media now. But my friend had Sky, so we would literally get extension cables and TVs and put them in the street and watch both until our parents banned us from doing that. But yeah, that's how we used to watch them on the, I think it was Friday nights back then. Yeah, growing up, watching it with friends, being a fan. And then a friend of mine once discovered a wrestling school in Essex, Dropkicks Wrestling. I think I was about 15 when I first went there. Started training, but then I also started training with a wrestling club in North London, Haringey Wrestling Club, which was a freestyle Olympic-style wrestling club. And they were all Congolese. A lot of them were Congolese national wrestling team that would compete in Commonwealth and Olympics and stuff like that. And so a lot of my early days was training in freestyle wrestling before getting over more into the dropkicks wrestling and the professional side of wrestling.
Amazing. And then obviously, so you trained with dropkicks, training with John Ritchie. What was your relationship like with him?
With John Ritchie, it was it was great. I mean, we hit it off pretty much straight away. I had a lot of respect for him. So my first memories of John Ritchie was actually seeing him on shows when it was the NWA Hammerlock days. We were fans. I didn't know anything about the British wrestling scene. Just used to watch it on TV. And then we saw that the local wrestling come to town, and it was NWA, and yeah, it was the likes of him, John Ritchie, and there was other names that people know, is like Tank, Magic, Paul Vault. There's a lot of names out there. JP Monroe. That'll come once every 6 months. when I first went to dropkick, so John wasn't there. It was Frank Reimer and Tony Scarlo doing the training school. Because of the problem with that is none of us drove. We're all still in school. The cost of and the travel was just we couldn't afford it. So we wanted to stay involved in wrestling, but it was with Haringey Wrestling Club, which was the freestyle wrestling. Because they were Congolese wrestlers. A lot of them did their version of pro wrestling, which was this. They called it Voodoo Pro Wrestling, which you can see that Vice did a program on it. This African style of wrestling, which is amazing, and a lot of them did that and did shows over here as well. So they'll teach me sort of the pro side of that, but with a legitimate shoot style, freestyle wrestling background. A lot of them would do various martial arts as well, like Sambo training. So they'll train us in that as well, and some jiu-jitsu and various other things. But then when we decided to go back to dropkicks, when one of us was able to drive, we went back, and at that point, John Ritchie was in. He was there doing the school with Frank Reimer at the time, and John was trying to launch this, bring back the traditional British World of Sport style of wrestling, but with more of a shoot style basis as well. And I think when he saw myself and the guys I trained with before that we were training similar what he wanted to do, he took a shine to us and saw that he could use us. So yeah, we went from there. And at that point, he was really trying to push they went back to doing the British style of wrestling with the rounds, the Lord Mount Evans rules, but with a focus on a mat base. So he took that, what we knew already, and sort of stripped us down again. Because when I was training in this voodoo style of wrestling, it was great. You know, I had this lot of explosive energy, but we'd do a match with them, and I'll be doing like 6 drop kicks in a row, followed by 6 monkey flips in a row. So I had this certain skills and this mat base, but John would strip it all back down, and it'd take me back down to the mat, and then build up from there. And then I'd learned a lot more psychology from John, like when was the best time to do the flashier moves, but then still have this mat base and tell a good story in the ring with the traditional British rounds, which I was new to.
Yeah. And then, so speaking of the sort of British rounds, obviously you've been with LDN since the start of the kind of TV era of LDN and their very first television taping. Obviously, as the show went on, they moved, as I'm aware, to a more traditional wrestling format. How did you find working with the traditional wrestling format?
Well, I loved it because it was a revival of the traditional style of British wrestling, and it was definitely the flavour of that time. Trying to pull away from the American style and sort of have our own identity again. And yeah, it was exciting because I guess it was kind of luck as well. You know, I was the right place at the right time and the right guy doing and training in that style. But then I was someone young and fresh doing it, I guess, and someone to kind of help take it forward. Not just me, there was others as well. But yeah, I mean, my first show for LDN, for example, it was a last minute. I think someone sort of dropped out of the show, or they needed someone to fill in. But Sanjay was launching his what they call the Spirit League at the time, and he was kind of doing like a talent scout with the wrestling channel. And I was on the show with John Ritchie the night before, Dropkick show, and we had quite a big title fight where I was defending the belt I had with Dropkicks, which was the light heavyweight title. And it was all, at that point, all of the Dropkicks shows and matches were under traditional British rules. So Sanjay come to the show, saw John and myself, knew that he wanted to use us for what the LDN brand was launching. And yeah, so my first show with LDN was, well, literally last minute. I think I got the call at maybe 3 o'clock that day, Saturday afternoon, to come to the show. And I was working, I had a Saturday job in a shop, finished work, jumped in the car. It was in Romford. I had no idea where I was going. This was before smartphones, Google Maps. It was just go to Harold Hill Leisure Centre, and no idea how I got there in the end. I just winged it, jumped in the car, drove there. I was in a 6-man tag, so it was nice to meet a lot of new workers from different schools, because I didn't have that interaction really with other different wrestlers from different schools and places at that time. And I teamed with a couple of good guys, Project Future, and we were against the Welsh Assembly, one of them being Ricky Hype, who we know from The Apprentice. Yeah, it went from there really, from doing that, and then one show become another show 2 weeks later, then you have a few more dates, and then this was before, I mean, Sanjay, before he was doing these massive half-term tours that he does now, he was doing, you know, we were weekend warriors, he was doing one show a week, then it become two if we're lucky, then he might do one or two in a half-term, and it grew from there. But as it grew, we started doing the more traditional world of sport rules, the Mount Evans rules. And it grew from there really. And I fit that well because I was someone that was taught it by a lot of people, such as John Ritchie, Johnny Kidd, Steve Gray, all these people. You know, I did training seminars that had a big influence on my training, and it developed from there really.
Yeah. And so in 2008, LDN did a Golden Grappler tournament, and you got to the finals of that tournament and wrestled Johnny Kidd. What was it like wrestling in Johnny and just sort of doing that whole tournament and then leading up to, you know, a very big match?
I thought it was brilliant. It was amazing. There was, it was a privilege to be, you know, featured massively in that and to reach the finals. The matches beforehand, it was fellow dropkicks wrestlers that I'd been able to train with that also did the rounds. Reaching the final, it was the first time meeting Johnny Kidd out of, I think I did maybe one training seminar before. Obviously I knew of him, I'd studied a lot of his tapes, but yeah, it was definitely quite overwhelming, you know, thinking this is a big match, you know, someone that's a legend on the British scene, well established. And on the day of the match there was definitely a big buzz about it. Going in the ring with him, it was an absolute honour really. Definitely tried the best I could. He had an answer for every move and hold I had. Just goes to show that the amount of dedication and training that the older generation had years ago. I learned so much that day. So, it was unreal. And there's videos of it on you can see on YouTube, and you can see the crowd are so into it. I'm sure that maybe there is an episode out there somewhere when it was on TV, and it was a real good day. Brilliant.
Yeah, I'm certain there was. I'm sure it will be on YouTube. There's a great deal of the LDN footage on YouTube. But I have to say, this is something that time and time again from doing the podcast, every single person I've spoken to who's had an opportunity to get in the ring with Johnny Kidd has had nothing but amazing things to say about the phenomenal learning experience. And that's been some people like yourself who's had the ability, you know, the opportunity to wrestle him in a match, and even just people who got in the ring with him for 30 minutes before a show. Everyone's had that kind of feedback.
Absolutely. And, you know, it never ends. I mean, you know, this was way back, you know, what did you say, 2006 was it? Did you say? I can't remember.
I think it was 2008.
Yeah, and so we're going, 12 years? And I wrestled him, I think my last show for Sanjay, I think, was with Johnny Kidd in Waltham Abbey, and I'm still learning to this day. And every time I've wrestled with Johnny since, you know, there's always, you learn something more, or there's another great memory of something in the show that happened spontaneously. Because it's not a case of, with someone like Johnny, you don't sit back and you go, oh, let's plan this, you know, we're going to do this and that. It's very organic, and it's just kind of off the fly, and especially with his Golden Grapplers. I remember thinking, oh, you know, does he want to go through some stuff? Does he want to talk to me? And it was just kind of, all right, yeah, we'll be all right. See you out there. And I thought, oh, here we go. But, you know, it just shows what a professional, what a great guy he is, because, he really took care of me out there. Put me in a good light, and carried the match, and I'll always be grateful and thankful for that. Such a great guy.
Yeah. And so moving on to one of your bigger feuds in LDN wrestling, it was actually with someone who was obviously, as we've discussed, quite instrumental in your training, and that was John Ritchie. And if I'm correct, so it was a Legend Showdown show in 2007, and it was a sold-out crowd. And you ended up beating him to become the LDN British Champion. What was it like, you know, beating someone who was so instrumental in training you and also then having a championship to hold and being a representative of the company?
I mean, that'll be up there. It's got to be my favourite memory in British wrestling in my career, definitely, just because it was such a special night. Having all the old, British legends there to witness it and to shake my hand after and say well done. A lot with, the current fans at the time and, a lot of trainees that were there as well. Because we had the launch of the Spirit League for LDN. Then the Golden Grappler was the time that really sort of said, okay, we're now shifting towards this with the Wrestling Channel and we're going to, bring the British style back. And then it all ended, with the Legend Showdown was just a great feature of, a look back from the previous years and the heritage of British wrestling. And I felt like the championship match with John going forward was then kind of, passing the torch to me, and saying that it's now the British wrestling is now pushing forward the younger guys to carry on with it. And it was a great night. And John didn't take it easy that night. The match, I've watched it back and it's quite a physical match still. There's a lot of work on the mat, hold for hold, catch as catch can wrestling, they call it. He definitely made me earn it. And every match leading up to it, I've worked with John so many times before then and since then. And it come together really well that night. And what a great night, The other matches on the card, it was just, I knew that I was, we had Johnny Kidd versus Johnny Sane that night. I've show, it was just a fantastic night showcasing British wrestling. And for me, it was such an honour to win the title that night, firstly, but also, just be featured on that show to say, we are the future of British wrestling now going forward. Even though it was a long time ago now, and it's great to see that younger guys still getting the opportunities to, push forward. And what opportunities there is now, with everything going on and the shows that Sanjay is doing now, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's definitely the start of something then.
Yeah, it's that sense of, the older generation sort of like passing on the torch, but at the same time, on a show where you're really being pushed to your absolute limits at the same time.
Yeah, and it didn't stop there. I won the British title off from John, and then, I was the reigning and defending champion, and that's when I started wrestling more legends like, Johnny Kidd again, Mal Sanders, Blondie Barrett. It just went on, and it was fantastic, completely new experience every time, every night, every show I went to. And the shows for LDM, with Sanjay, they were really picking up. There was more and more shows. That's when we started doing the half-term tours and, wrestling 4 times a week at this point, if that, sometimes 2 matches per show, sorry. It's really picking up. So for me, it was probably the most that I learned at the time being the champion as well, because there was a lot more feature, going on with a lot of previous British wrestling legends and also newer stars coming in and people that, were from elsewhere, different parts of the country that I hadn't met before. And we were, working together and pushing British wrestling with these rounds forward. Yeah.
Now, speaking of other legends and feuds, you feuded with Kendo Nagasaki. What was it like? Although I've been told things perhaps didn't, went a little bit wrong. What was it like feuding with Kendo? And perhaps if you could speak a little bit about sort of that whole experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, my first experience with Kendo was meeting him when we were leading up to, he had a tournament, the Sword of Excellence, which he then, I think, decided to keep himself. There was a tournament where there was the likes of Robbie Brookside, Phil Powers, myself, there was others in it. Again, showcasing British traditional wrestling. Then he decided to keep the award for himself that he brought in. And then the idea was I was going to feud with him over that, or I think someone else was going to feud over him, but then there was arguments about disagreements over something, I don't know what. Then he decided that I was going to be the one to work with him and feud with him, which it started fine, to be honest. Me personally, I never had an issue with him, and I don't know if he had an issue with me, he didn't tell me to my face. I know that there's, you know, people have seen videos, and we spoke about in previous interviews about him taking liberties with the younger generation. I didn't have a problem with that. I think I was, you know, established at that point, and I think he knew not to, you know, take a liberty with me, because the trainer had from John and previous in the freestyle wrestling and other martial arts, I think he knew that if you try to bully me, it wouldn't have happened. But when I met him before, because we actually had a ladder match, which a lot of people don't know, there was a ladder match with him and Blondie Barrett with me and Hakan, and that was fine when we worked together. It was a physical match, but no point did he go too far or take any liberties. It was fine, and then we won that match, and then the idea was for the two of us to carry on the feud. I remember one day, it wasn't probably a week before the show, it was Legends Showdown 2. So it was all built for us to fight again. Sanjay gave me a call and said, I think I've answered this already, but I'll just double check. Are you happy with to be cut with a samurai sword? I said, I think you know the answer to that. Absolutely not. Yeah, and because I wasn't willing to have my head sliced open with a samurai sword, he decided he didn't want to be part of LDN wrestling anymore, and that was the end of it, really, which was a shame, because I was looking forward to it. When I had previously worked with Kendo, it was fine. He was courteous and professional to me, and I was back. But yeah, and it just ended abruptly. And you know, I wouldn't say to anyone to do it. One, it's too dangerous. You know. Also, the LDN, you know, shows are family orientated. I've never seen anything on World of Sport Wrestling with someone getting cut open with a samurai sword. So to me, and Sanjay agreed, it had no place in wrestling, in British wrestling at all. You know, you could probably see it on an adult themed over 18 show that like extreme violence, but even then you kind of be pushing it out there a bit, because if that goes wrong, you know, it's cutting someone's head open. You know, it's with a samurai sword, it's too graphic, really. You know, and you're going to seriously hurt someone. And like I said, I'm a police officer. I can't turn up to work with a sliced open foreheads and do my job properly, really, can I? So
yeah, totally. There's certain risks that you accept with wrestling, but there's certain risks that you just shouldn't. And I think that's something that we're seeing more and more now. As obviously this was quite some time ago, but wrestlers, you know, are starting to say, look, I'm not going to do that because that's just ridiculous. It's pushing the realms of possibility and reason out of scope.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just, wrestling is physical. You can never get away with that. You know, people say, oh, it's all a show, it's predetermined. Yeah, but you know, you take a bump in the ring or you hit each other, there is contact, there is that physicality. Some things are worth doing at a certain time, but for me and for the LDN wrestling shows, yeah, it just, to me, it didn't make sense. It was just something in his head that he had that was a good idea, I think, for his own ego. It wouldn't have benefited the show or anyone at all, and it was just, yeah, it was too dangerous. And well, you know, I've got Sanjay to thank, really, because he said absolutely no before he'd even asked me. It wasn't a case of, will you do it? It was, I've said no, but, you know, he still ran it by me after to be like, I think Sanjay was like, wanted that reassurance. I'm off, you know, thinking, right, I was like, yeah, absolutely. No, it's a terrible idea. Especially at the show as well, Legends Showdown 2, which is to showcase, you know, celebrate the heritage of British wrestling and look back and acknowledge, you know, the wrestlers from the years before that, you know, gave us these opportunities. And then, yeah, to head sliced down by a samurai sword, it just don't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of Sanjay, obviously Sanjay, despite the fact that he doesn't like people getting cut open with swords, he is quite a character.
Absolutely.
You know, a very energetic person, and sort of known for mischief and hijinks and being a little bit controversial. Do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Sanjay right before we bring him on to have a chat?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. Sanjay's one of the probably the most controversial character in British wrestling. People love him, people hate him. He's always been fine with me. First met Sanjay, obviously, when he was coming to places like Dropkicks Wrestling and looking for, you know, talent with the to go forward with the show, TV show, Capital TV. First show I did for Sanjay, last minute, paid me a $5, said thanks. Then asked me to do more shows, you know, and things went on. Always had a lot of respect for Sanjay. But I've always been honest with Sanjay. And then Sanjay also has been on to me. He never plays games. He tells you what he expects from you with the show, how the day's going to go. And if you don't like it, then that's it. You're not forced to go. If you're after a job, you know, there's certain things he expects. Everyone comes to the show, everyone mucks in, you know, and puts the ring up and takes it down. You'll sometimes get people that turn up with an ego and decide they don't want to do that. Well, no, they're not used again. I mean, I've been sacked more times than I can remember from Sanjay because, but I'll do a show, you know, for other promotions at times, and he'll get upset, you know, and sack me. Then he'll call me and say, I need you for a show. And I say, I can't do it. Oh, why not? Because I'm sacked. Oh, well, one night only, you can come back. And then, But no, I mean, you know, we're always on good terms. When I lost my dad, Sanjay was one of the first people to call me to see how I was, you know, and I won't forget that. You know, as a business person, you know, you don't ever have to do that. I always appreciate it. But I wouldn't be where I am in, you know, British wrestling if it wasn't for the push Sanjay and the opportunities he gave me. He's really annoying though. I can't swear on this. He's a character. But also I understand with Sanjay as well. It's his product, it's his business, and he wants to run a business model where he has exclusive, you know, wrestlers that you won't necessarily see elsewhere. But at the same time, I like to, in the past, learn, you know, elsewhere, go elsewhere, try different promotions and stuff. And if it encroaches in where he wants to operate and stuff, then I completely understand. But that's what we've got. We've got that mutual respect where we're upfront with each other, don't play any games. So there's definitely that respect there. Even though he's really bloody annoying at times.
Well, we're going to bring Sanjay in right now, and we'll let him tell a story and speak his piece and sort of stuff.
Here we go.
Here he is. Well,
I also said.
So Sanjay, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'll just give you a couple of minutes. We've got 3 minutes left, so just take your time and tell a story or something, or have a chat.
Sure, I've known obviously Yorghos, or George, as we call him, the English name, Yorghos. Let's start that again. I fucked it all up. Start again.
So
Sanjay, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to talk with George and have a chat, tell a story.
Sure. Obviously, I've known Yorghos for a multiple amount of years. We had a few fallouts over the years, as he's discussed, with different business ways of business should be. I've got my way of doing things. It works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. Sometimes they go and then they come back, but and often you don't speak to some people again. But throughout all of this, myself and Yorghos, George, have been friends and continue to speak outside away from wrestling, and we've never really fallen out. I'm sure George, you'll agree that we've never fallen out to the point where we've not really stopped talking, maybe for a little while, but we've always sort of kept in touch.
We've never had had bad words about each other or come to blows, or it's just been. I
wouldn't want to beat you up.
Yeah. Well, only if you pay me. You are paying me for this, by the way, aren't you?
Justin is the man in charge. He's got a lovely little checkbook, and he's a modern. And he does bank transfers, so he'll sort you out. But
brilliant, yeah.
Stuff. But we went to Romania. So we went for a friend of mine who works for me, Tom Fulton, who's from Scotland, lives in Romania, runs a show out there. So I took Anneli Travis, and Yorghos says he was available. So the promoter flew us all out. to Romania, and we had a great time. We went there, and this story makes me look bad more than he does. But at the age of how was Romania last year, wasn't it? So the age of 33, I still have never used the washing machine because I don't know how to use it. And Yorghos, who stayed in Airbnb, did my washing for me, and how great I was very grateful. I think I bought you a Diet Coke or something like that. So I was very appreciative that you done my washing. I couldn't work out.
Again, you exaggerate the truth. I don't remember any Diet Coke. And also you contradict yourself because you always tell me how much weight I put on. If I put on so much weight, why would I be drinking Diet Coke? It's full fat Coke, so...
yeah, exactly. Well, no, that's why I gave you Diet Coke, because you shouldn't be drinking full fat Coke, because you balloon up. It's in the bulking stage. But like I said, some of the interesting. We went to Romania together. We had a great holiday because we did one show. It was on a Saturday, but we was there for a couple of days. We went to a war museum that had a celebration, so we had quite a lot of banter. So we had a great time out there. He's joining us in Gibraltar as well, which I don't know if he's an actor. He's come to Gibraltar, but there's been other stories where we've travelled up and down the country. You started LDN when you was 19, 20?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, definitely 19. You know, it could have been 18. You never, I think.
And how old are you now? You must be 30, 31.
Younger than you. Younger than you. Yeah.
Younger than me.
Sorry there, guys. Sorry to the viewers. Technical difficulties. Zoom cut us off, but because we're doing a video one, we've got to re-establish everyone. But welcome back on, guys. Sorry about that.
Sanjay's cutting costs again.
Yeah, I didn't put 50p in the electricity meter. That probably goes over Justin's head. It's quite young, but we'll wrap this up very quick. But I just said there's been loads of instances where you've travelled up and down the country. You've done loads of things. And, you know, we like to have a little bit of fun at the shows. As you've seen with all the wrestlers, I've got stories of them being embarrassed. George here thought it would be funny at one show. I believe we were in Potter's Bar at the Willits Theatre, and he decided to pull his pants down and then try sitting on me whilst on the show. So, and then this film...
Wasn't me.
It was him. He'll deny it. It's on a private link. But then it would be funny where the wrestler pulls her pants down and then he tries to sit on me and they filmed it. And so...
That was Ash.
Yeah, you've got the footage. I'm pretty sure it was your boss here who did that. But nonetheless...
I can make a bet if you want. I've got the link. I'll send it to you. But I was involved in it.
Yeah.
But it was Ash.
Instigator.
Yeah.
Them two started off who thought it'd be fun. I was ring announcing. And I didn't expect to be mooned right in front of my face. And then literally, I was like, whoa, it's too close, too close. So that's the audience didn't really see it either, which was the funniest thing. They don't
probably for the best as well.
Yeah, probably for the best. Wasn't a pleasant sight. So you should.
Why don't we tell the story when you become a wrestler for the night in Croydon, and have you still got the blue tracksuit?
No, what it was, and I didn't become a wrestler. I didn't do anything in the ring. Mal Saunders, veteran from motorsport. Him and Carl Kramer, who's legitimately 30 stones, not in a, pretending he's 30. He is huge. Google Carl Kramer with a K, and you watch him, and they thought it'd be fun to set up a tag match with me and Yorghos, and I had no idea they were doing this. And it's at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon, and I was like, I'm not doing a tag match. I can't bloody wrestle. So I'm just the ring announcer. So at that show, I was just being the timekeeper because Steve Litton was there. I ring announcer. So the next thing I know, I'm involved in this tag match. I said, well, I'm not bloody doing anything. Mal Saunders, who's 60 plus, decided to chase me up the bleacher seating. And he's 60, so I thought he ain't going to catch up with me. And I'm out of breath, dying, and he's like that close to me. So I duck in between the customers' row, pull a guy off his seat, who's in his 70s probably, make him stand in front of me and run off. But yeah, I wore a blue tracksuit because I'm going to wear ring gear. And it matched his, but it's the first tracksuit I bought as an adult. And I've still got it, and I've never worn it again. So it matched out.
Now's the perfect time with the lockdown, just lounging around the house. You're probably getting up at midday every day. It's perfect.
No. I get up at 8 o'clock every day, even if I go to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning. I might not get out of bed, but I'm awake. I'm an early bird kind of person. I was up at 6 today, 6 o'clock in the morning. So but we've had some fun anyway, sort of thing. So
definitely. And what I definitely need to get around to getting in touch with the Guinness World Records, because you're definitely the promoter that's knocked himself out the most times on shows, whether it be accidentally getting hit by a wrestler or running around and running into your own ring.
I've also lost my keys, which you've probably seen 1,000 times. Every show I lose my keys. I put them down somewhere. I always forget. So I think I'll probably beat the record for that. But nonetheless,
I think that's how I get unsacked by promising to find them for you, and they're just in Alan's jacket the whole time. It's fine.
you know, no, they're normally in Dave Walker's box. He puts them in the merchandise box. I think that's on purpose to wind me up, sort of thing. So there you go. Anyway, Justin, it's thank you for inviting me on to make fun of George here. It's always fun. It's aside. It's always great to have you back, especially after I've got rid of you for a while. It's always nice when you come back and see.
We're due an argument, so yeah, you need to start running shows and book me again, and yeah,
we'll get rid of you for a little while.
Find a way, yeah.
Absolutely. Justin, all yours.
All right, amazing. Thanks very much for joining me, Sanjay, to wrap that up. And of course, George, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. It was really interesting talking to you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. And yeah, looking forward to getting back out there and when this is all over, and let's all have some fun again, shall we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Most important thing is having fun.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's episode. I'd like to thank you all for joining me. I think it has been a fantastic episode. The guests have been absolutely amazing. Next week, I do believe, is going to be the final episode of LDN Underground, and we've got something extra special for you. We've got a little bit of a new format. We're going to be bringing in the most guests that we've seen. It's going to be absolutely spectacular. So I hope you can join us then. Thank you very much.
This is London.